While I'm out here and thinking about it, let's talk about something else. Work hardening! You see, work hardening is this phenomenon where deformation and heat creates stress in a piece of steel, or copper, or silver, or whatever the hell it is, and that stress creates hardness. What does hardness then create? It creates brittleness. And brittleness is not good. Well, is work hardening a good thing? I argue, no, it is not. It's not a good thing. Work hardening, especially when it's something like a cast iron anvil that's already brittle, it does not help. It will only cause problems because work hardening adds stress. It makes it brittle. That's not good for an anvil. Cast iron is very brittle because it has a ton of carbon in it. What does that carbon do? Well, that carbon cannot be contained by the crystal structure of the iron, ferrite and pearlite. Because it cannot be contained in that crystal structure, it is essentially a supersaturated solution. What happens with a supersaturated solution? Well, if you supersaturate water with salt, the extra salt will settle out of solution and form crystals. Those crystals within steel do not settle out to one side or to the bottom of the mixture. They're evenly distributed throughout the entire piece as inclusions of graphite. Now, if you don't know what graphite is, it is a mineral composed of carbon. Straight carbon. And we use it as pencil lead. That's one of the most common uses. Well, pencil lead breaks pretty easily, right? It shears apart. You can draw on something because the bonds between the graphite particles, or the graphite crystals, it's low enough that they will just shear apart and come apart. So if graphite will just shear apart and it'll break very easily, is it a good thing to have that in a piece of iron? No. Because graphite breaks so easily that when you induce stress, the graphite allows a crack or a fracture to propagate. Why did that break? This piece of steel broke because I work hardened it. I forced it back and forth and back and forth, inducing stress, inducing hardness. This is mild steel. Mild steel cannot be hardened, except through work hardening. Well, how much benefit do you really get from work hardening? You get a couple points of hardness. But those couple points of hardness are not really worth it when you consider how fragile it becomes. Work hardening is not a good thing. Cast iron does not work harden because it breaks. Steel work hardens. That's not a good thing. Anything that work hardens gets brittle without really becoming stronger. At least when you're talking about iron. Carbon steel, tool steels, bearing steel, work hardening is especially not a good thing because it's already a hardenable alloy. Just harden it. There is no benefit from 2 points of Rockwell hardness and tons of brittleness when you could have 30 additional points of hardness and less brittleness, more toughness. It's stupid. So no, a cast iron object, cast iron vise, a cast iron anvil will not work harden, and it will definitely not become better because it work hardens. Just thought I'd point that out. Oh, and side note, a lot of people seem to think that railroad rails are work hardened. They're not. Over time, yes, the surface of these rails may work harden a little bit because they're deformed slightly over years and years of really heavy trains driving along them, riding along these rails. Does that produce any beneficial quality within this piece of steel? Absolutely not. This, as far as I know, is either something along the lines of 1055 or 5160. I've heard that newer ones are 5160 and that maybe back in the day, the older ones like this, maybe, are something more along the lines of 1055, 1050, medium carbon steel. And it is hardened. I know it is hardened. It is not work hardened. Also, because this was not a new rail. You want to tell me that, oh yeah, your work hardened railroad rail, yeah, that's not going to compare to a cast iron anvil. No. This was a brand new rail, never used. The paint was still on the top. There was paint on the top of this rail. It was not work hardened because it was never used. It was induction hardened or some other process to harden this top rail, or probably the entire thing, because I can't drill through this shit. This is too hard for me to drill through. Not just because it's a carbon steel, but because this entire thing is hard. The entire thing. And if it were work hardened, this would be the only work hardened surface. It wouldn't be this. But the entire thing's hard. Work hardening's bad. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.